Good morning and welcome to Coffee and the Word. Last week I started with, I ended the week talking about some of the Bible heroes of old. And I talked about Daniel and how Daniel didn't get to the lion's den immediately. His lion's den experience was the result of his resolution in his youth that he held to. And I told you during that time there were three other men or boys actually, who were taken captive with Daniel, whose names were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so I want to talk to you about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But before I do, I want you to understand a couple of things that are kind of important when you dive into Scripture. When you were a kid, if you heard all these Bible stories when you were a kid, and you probably heard them in this heroic kind of way. And, that's still kind of how I hear them, but I realize there's so much going on now. And so I want you to, if you know the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I want you to think about it. Think about how you think about it. And then just give you a second. And I bet you remember the furnace. And I bet you remember the four men walking around in the furnace instead of three. But I want to share with you something else that happens in this. Actually, two things that maybe you didn't talk about when you were a kid. So, first of all, how did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego end up in the furnace? This story happens in Daniel chapter 3, which is shortly after they are taken captive and Daniel has just resolved not to eat the king's food, and they become very well known in the kingdom. And the king's name was Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar did what a lot of us wouldn't even consider doing anymore. We don't operate this way, but Nebuchadnezzar built an image of gold that was huge. It was 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and about 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. This is the image of their new god, right? And today we don't think about that like that. We don't make graven image to bow down before, but we still have a problem with idolatry. The difference is our idolatry often doesn't come in gold. We don't worship gold things. We worship a made-up God oftentimes, and when I say me, I mean our world today. We worship at the altar of all kinds of ideas, and we love ideas. We worship at the God of the political altar. We worship at the God of social justice altar. We worship at the God of, and I could keep going, all the different kind of altars that we tend to worship to, and it becomes the thing that we bow down before, and it becomes the thing that we that drives our identity. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was the king, and he felt like it was important, and apparently this was true back then. They wanted something tangible that they could see, that they could worship. And so Nebuchadnezzar made this massive edifice, and essentially it's a god that is made in the image of man. In other words, we worship a God who made us in his image, and then most idolatrous worshipers worship a God made in their image. They decide its attributes and its characteristics. And I'm going to tell you, while we don't make these golden images, we do make up our own God too often. Too frequently, we establish this concept of God that isn't God. We don't look to Revelation to discover who God is. We look to our own understanding to develop who God is. And so it's not that far off. And then we want other people to bow to that God, right? We want other people to ascribe to the God that we say, my God, the God that I serve would never, and we fill in a blank, or the God that I serve will always. And so what happens a lot of times, especially when we're raising our children to serve a God we made up, and I know we don't think we made it up, but if you're not worshiping the God that has been revealed in Scripture the way he's been revealed in Scripture, you're making up a God. And so we'll get our children to do that, and our children eventually find out that this God is nothing. He doesn't have the power to do what the God of the Bible is revealed to be doing. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego believe in the God of the Bible. And Nebuchadnezzar has made this 90-foot, 9 feet wide God of gold, and he wants everybody to bow down and worship it. This is a big deal to him. But he finds out that these 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse. They're not going to do it. And what's really interesting about this is he approaches them because he's angry at them. He said, why are you not bowing down? And the scripture literally says, he was furious with rage. How could you not? How could you not bow down before this God that I have commanded you to bow down before? And so there's a lot of things going on there. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer this question in the most respectful yet definitive way possible. Here's what he says. Here's what they say. King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this manner. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Listen to this part, because it's my favorite part. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I love the definitiveness of this, but I also love the fact that they're not trying to make some big scene about this. They're simply stating that the God that we serve is much more powerful than the God that you made. The God that made us is much more powerful than the God that you created. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saying, the God that we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, from your hand. But here's the thing I want you to understand, King. Even if he chooses not to, because he's still God, he gets to decide. Even if he chooses not to, we're still not willing to bow down before you. And I love that attitude. So they're going into the flames. They're unwilling to sacrifice their own life to worship this God, this fake God, because they serve the real God. And Nebuchadnezzar is furious. So he has them thrown in. In fact, he tells them to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than they normally have it. The people who end up throwing Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are killed by the flames. It's so hot. And so they throw him in, and Nebuchadnezzar gets to his feet at some point. And he looks in and he says, I don't see 3 men, I see 4 men. Didn't we only throw, wasn't there only 3? Now there's 4? And then he does something interesting. He says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out of there. And then he makes a decree. And he says, no one shall bash the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because no God that I've ever worshipped is able to do that. I want you to understand something. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't in awe of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nebuchadnezzar was in awe of the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego gave him all the credit, gave him all the credence, and gave him their whole worship. One of the problems in our world today is we like to take credit for things we don't deserve to take credit for. We don't give God deference to the things we should give God deference to. We don't tell people about the God that we serve. And so what I want you guys to understand is how you choose to live your life and by what motivation you explain your life as lived by. In other words, it's because of the God that I serve that I won't do this, that I will do that. When you live your life for that God and you let people know that that's your motivation is to worship that God, not to get glory unto yourself, that God will end up being glorified. And I hate to tell you this, but those of you who are parents, your children are trying to figure out who they should worship. Mom and dad, their friends, or a God that's powerful enough to deliver you even from a fiery furnace. Who do you give the credit to? Your coworkers. Who do you give the credit to? Maybe it's time we start telling people what motivates us, telling people who rescues us, telling people about the God that we serve. And then when they see things, they'll know it's not him, it's not her, it's the God that they serve. Our God is an amazing God who has done much more than we can think or even ask. But too often we take credit for it. I hope you'll think about this. How can you help the world see the God that has done for you what he's done for me? How can you help the world to see it's because of him and not because of you that you are where you are? I hope you have a wonderful week. Your Monday morning encouragement is let the world know that you are motivated not by self-interest, but by a God who saves even from the flames of a 7 times hotter fiery furnace. Hope you have a wonderful Monday morning. God bless you. This has been another edition of Coffee and the Word.